Hi guys, good news. I subscribed to the full version of Screencastify. So now I can do longer videos that aren't 5 minutes long and I don't have to shove everything in trying to get you all the information that you need. So I'm going to do the roots explanations and I can do them all in one magic video, which is awesome. So this is roots weeks 9 and 10. I mean, sorry, 19 and 20. I'm still on my first cup of coffee, so struggle is real. And your first root is luke or loom, which means light, which we've talked about before because we had the word translucent, right, about letting light through. And I chose elucidate and illuminate, so you could have one of each of the spellings. You could see how that works. And if you elucidate something, then you are literally like letting light out. The Latin here is what that means, but it means to make something clear or to explain it. You're sort of like opening the light up to everybody. So they're like, oh, okay, now I know what you mean. And then illuminate is a word you're probably familiar with, but it just means to light up or to shed light on to something. Next is cycle, which means obviously ring or circle. And there are lots of words that have this root. But I chose cyclone and recycle because I figured bicycle and tricycle were a little too easy. So a cyclone is a spinning windstorm, and it's called that, of course, because it spins in a circle. And when you recycle something, it seems kind of crazy to use this particular root for this because, of course, the definition is to convert waste into reusable material. And that's a lovely typo that I have there. But it's recycle is because you're cycling it around again, like it goes back around, basically, the circle or the ring. And if you look at the graphic that they use for recycling, that's a triangle technically, but the arrows go around. It's that idea of you're continuing to use it, so it's making its way back around again. Next up is lat, which means line or side, and I chose latitude and quadrilateral. So when I was a kid, I always would forget which one was latitude and which one was longitude, when you're looking at the globe and you're doing, the measurements. And my teacher once told me that latitude goes around, and I should remember that lat rhymes with fat, which was very helpful, and clearly I still remember that. But in reality, if you know that it means line or side, then you would easily remember that latitude goes side to side around the globe, right? It goes around the middle from the equator down to the South Pole and from the equator up to the North Pole. And of course, longitude goes long ways from top to bottom. And then quadrilateral, quadra, I'm sure you know, means four. And so it's a four-sided figure. We use that type of phrase in math a lot. You might have heard it already. You will for sure hear it when you take geometry. But we talk about triangles that are equilateral, right, which means all the sides are equal. Or in this case, quadrilateral, meaning four sides, like a square or a rectangle. Next up is mort or mori, which means death. Moribund is a really fancy adjective that you'll see sometimes in literature that just means dying, and it can be used to describe like people that are actually sickly, and dying, but it can also be used to describe inanimate objects, like the economy could be moribund. Your attitude could be moribund sometimes. You might see it used that way. And then mortality, which I'm sure is a word that you know, can mean the state of being able to die, right? You have mortality, you are immortal, or it could mean actually death. We talk about the mortality rates of, in certain countries and things like that. So it sort of has dual meaning there, obviously all coming from that same root, meaning death. Next up is phil, which means love. And bibliophile and philanthropy are the words that I chose. And a bibliophile is me, really, a book lover. Biblio, of course, means book. And so somebody who's a bibliophile is a big fan of books. You might hear somebody say that they're an Anglophile, which means that they really like things that are British. I also am kind of an Anglophile. And so you can really attach phile to lots of things that you might like. There are people who call themselves aquaphiles because they really like to be in the water. It can be attached to anything. And then philanthropy, which means love or care for mankind. Hopefully you recognize anthro there as another root in this word that means, remember, human from one of our very first lists. So somebody who is a philanthropist does lots of good for their fellow man. And the basic root here means obviously that you care about other people, you like mankind, and you want to do things for them. Bill and Melinda Gates are big philanthropists. They do a lot of philanthropy because they give a lot of money through their organization to help other people. Voc means voice or call. So your vocation, like my vocation is teaching, is your job, and it's called that because people would often say that they felt called to do a certain, bit of work. And so it's the fancy thing here. Your calling is your job. And what's really interesting is that avocation, you just take the word vocation with the letter A in front of it. A means away. The prefix A means away. And so your avocation is your hobby because it takes you away from your job. And then advocate. An advocate is somebody who speaks up for themselves or for someone else. It can be a noun or it can be a verb, as I gave it to you here. So if you advocate for yourself, it means that you are speaking up and you're saying what you need or what needs to be done. And you might advocate for yourself, but you might also advocate for other people. Teachers often advocate for their students if we feel like maybe you need something that you're not getting. We'll speak up and try to get that for you. Struct, to build. Lots of words here, all of which I'm sure you're familiar with. To construct something, con means together. So construct means you're building it together. You're putting the building together, basically. And then instruct is sort of like you're building the information into someone or building it into like the class. So you teach someone a subject or a skill when you instruct them. Easy words that I'm sure you already knew. Rupt means to break. And you might be familiar with the word rupture, which is the easiest, most common one that comes from this. You can have a ruptured appendix, for example. You can have a rupture in the water line in your house. Lots of things can be ruptured. But I chose erupt and interrupt. And we've had interrupt before for enter, but it's kind of interesting to see what the root is here. So erupt, obviously, when you think of erupting, you think of a volcano. And that is sort of what the word means. So E means out. So it literally is like breaking out, bursting forth. You can erupt, right? Personally, emotionally, start yelling at people, or you can like erupt into sobs or something like that. But we mostly hear about volcanoes, of course, erupting. And then interrupt, which you already know what that means. But it's interesting because interrupt means that you're sort of breaking into a conversation. So enter means like into, between. And so you literally like break into it to put yourself into it, which I know you know what it means, but it's nice sometimes to see where it comes from. So next up are the prefixes. Retro, which means backwards. And what's interesting about retro is that retro is not really a word all by itself, or it wasn't originally a word all by itself. It was just a prefix, but it has since become a word used to describe things, right, that are from the olden days, right? People wear bell bottoms, and you're like, oh, that's retro, or certain clothing or sunglasses that are like huge, it's retro. Music can be retro. And we use that a lot. And it refers to things from the past, of course. So the words that I gave you are retroactive and retrospect. So retroactive means that it takes effect from a date in the past. You often hear this about like pay. People will get retroactively paid, if they for some reason weren't getting paid, and then whatever it is gets taken care of, then they retroactively get paid. And then retrospect, spect already, means to see or to look. And so retrospect means if you're looking back. We also call it hindsight, right? Because you're looking back. So people will say, in retrospect, I probably should not have run him over with my car. Well, looking back, I probably shouldn't have done that. Yeah, that's a good point. And then intra means within. Intramural is often used to describe sports that are played in a school, and they're called intramural sports because you don't play against other teams, you play against the same people from your school. You might have multiple teams there, but it's not teams from a different school. Mural means wall, and so intramural literally means like within the walls of something, usually used to describe sports. I played intramural softball, in fact, when I was in middle school. And then intravenous, which if you've ever had an IV, if you've ever been sick and had to have an IV, that's what that stands for. And so intravenous means within the veins. So if you get like intravenous, like hydration or something like that, you get an IV within the veins. And that is it. Nice and quick and easy, and we didn't get cut off by the timer. So I'm going to post these. They're already up just as the slideshow, but I'm going to post this video as well. So you'll be able to listen to it once, and then if you don't want to have to listen to it again while you're making flashcards or anything like that, you'll have just the plain slideshow that you can look for. So you should be all set. If you have questions about the words or anything like that, you know that you can always reach out to me anytime.